Hi, friends, and welcome to our second video in the series of Paris Agreement. Last time we tried to understand what is Paris Agreement, another history about Paris Agreement, how it evolved, and what are the key elements of Paris Agreement. പ്രധാനമായിട്ട് 5 points ആണ് നമ്മൾ ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്തത്. And like we said last time, the second video which we're doing now, this is more of an attempt to try and understand some of the basic concepts which would help us understand Paris Agreement more and maybe look at it from a more practical perspective. അപ്പം അങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഈ ഒരു വീഡിയോ സെഷനിൽ നമ്മൾ കവർ ചെയ്യാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത് പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും 4 points ആണ്. It starts with trying to understand what is greenhouse effect. We would then look at what are the greenhouse gases. We would then try to understand what is global warming. And finally, we will look at climate change and the possible impacts it has on our daily lives. ഈ 4 points ആണ് നമ്മൾ ഈ വീഡിയോയിൽ കവർ ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. So let's take each of these points. Now, to start off with greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect എന്താണെന്ന് മനസ്സിലാക്കാനായിട്ട് let's try to understand what is greenhouse first. Greenhouse, I'm sure that most of us would have seen a greenhouse in one place or the other. ബേസിക്കലി വെജിറ്റബിൾസ് ഫ്ലവേഴ്സ് ഒക്കെ വളർത്താൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഉണ്ടാക്കിയിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു സ്ട്രക്ചറാണ്. അപ്പോൾ അതിനൊരു ഫ്രെയിം ഉണ്ടാകും. അതിൻ്റെ ആ ഫ്രെയിമിൻ്റെ അകത്ത് നമ്മൾ ക്ലിയർ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഗ്ലാസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പ്ലാസ്റ്റിക് ആണ് കവർ ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസിൽ എന്താ സംഭവിക്കുന്നത് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ the greenhouse permits sunlight to come in and it actually retains the warmth of the sunlight so that the plants, whatever you're growing inside, the vegetables or the flowers, whatever you're growing inside, can remain in a warm environment, which helps it to grow better. അപ്പോൾ രാത്രി സമയത്ത് പോലും പുറത്ത് തണുപ്പാണെന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസിൻ്റെ അകത്ത് കുറച്ച് വാമായിട്ടിരിക്കും. സോ ഇറ്റ്സ് മോർ കൺഡ്യൂസീവ് ഫോർ പ്ലാന്റ്സ് ടു ഗ്രോ ബെറ്റർ. ഇതാണ് ബേസിക്കലി ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ് നമ്മൾ യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ബേസിക് കൺസെപ്റ്റ് മാത്രമേ ഉള്ളൂ ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസ് എഫക്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സാധനത്തിനകത്ത്. ലെറ്റ്സ് ട്രൈ ടു അണ്ടർസ്റ്റാൻഡ് വാട്ട് ഇസ് എ ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസ് എഫക്റ്റ്. അപ്പോൾ ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസിൽ നമ്മൾ എന്താ കണ്ടത്? ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസ് ആക്ച്വലി പെർമിറ്റ്സ് സൺലൈറ്റ് ടു കം ഇൻ ആൻഡ് ഇറ്റ് റിറ്റെയിൻ സം ഓഫ് ദ വാംത്ത് വിതൗട്ട് ലെറ്റിംഗ് ഇറ്റ് ഗോ ഔട്ട്. ആൻഡ് ഈ വാംത്ത് ആണ് പ്ലാന്റ്സിൻ്റെ ഗ്രോത്തിന് ഹെൽപ്പ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. സെയിം തന്നെയാണ് ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസ് എഫക്റ്റ്, ബട്ട് ഇറ്റ് ഹാപ്പൻസ് ഇൻ എ ഡിഫറെൻറ്റ് വേ. ഇപ്പം നമുക്ക് പ്രോബ്ലം എഞ്ചിനീയറിംഗോ മാത്സോ ഒക്കെ പഠിച്ച ആൾക്കാർക്ക് പരിചയമുള്ള ഒരു പേരായിരിക്കും ഫൂറിയർ സീരീസിനെ പറ്റി കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു മെയിൻ ലൈൻ ഓഫ് സ്റ്റഡി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് വേവ് ലെങ്സിനെ പറ്റിയിട്ടായിരുന്നു. ഫ്രീക്വൻസീസ് വേവ് ലെങ്ത്തിനെ പറ്റിയിട്ടായിരുന്നു പുള്ളിയുടെ ഒരു മെയിൻ സ്റ്റഡി. ആൻഡ് അങ്ങനെ സ്റ്റഡി ചെയ്ത കൂട്ടത്തിൽ പുള്ളി മനസ്സിലാക്കിയ കാര്യമാണ് സൺലൈറ്റിൽ നിന്ന് വരുന്ന റേഡിയേഷൻസിന് സംഭവിക്കുന്ന വ്യത്യാസങ്ങളും ഇത് അബ്സോർബ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അദ്ദേഹമാണ് ഈ പറഞ്ഞ he felt that it is similar to what happens in a greenhouse, so he called it as greenhouse effect. അപ്പോൾ ഈ സെയിം സംഭവമാണ് നമ്മുടെ എർത്തിൻ്റെ കേസിൽ നടക്കുന്നത്. All planets receive the energy from the sun. Similarly, Earth also receives the energy from sun. Now, solar radiation to reach the planets has to travel through space, and for Earth also it's the same thing. Now, in the case of Earth, it has to also pass through the atmosphere and reach the surface of the Earth. A certain amount of the solar radiation is reflected back by the atmosphere as well as the Earth's surface, around 30%. Now, out of the remaining, the land and the oceans on the surface of the Earth absorbs a lot of energy, and this actually heats up the Earth. Now, all the energy is not absorbed, and especially because there's a temperature difference between Earth and Sun, the Earth radiates some energy back into space. Now, this energy also has to pass through the atmosphere again, and eventually a lot of energy actually goes towards space. However, because of the greenhouse gases which are present in the atmosphere naturally, and because of some of their properties, some heat is actually trapped in the atmosphere, and this is what actually keeps the Earth warm enough to sustain life. However, human activities such as burning fossil fuels, agriculture, and land clearing increases the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere, and this starts trapping extra heat and causes the Earth's temperature to keep on rising. So this is greenhouse effect and its effect on global warming. Okay, so we have understood what greenhouse effect is. Now, greenhouse gases, which are the greenhouse gases? Greenhouse gases എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും we talk about carbon dioxide, we talk about methane, we talk about nitrous oxide, we talk about chlorofluorocarbons, we talk about hydrofluorocarbons, and water vapor is also a main greenhouse effect ഉള്ള ഒരു gas. But then the life of water vapor in the atmosphere is very short, so അത് വലിയൊരു ഇമ്പാക്റ്റ് ഉണ്ടാക്കാറില്ല as compared to the other gases which I just mentioned. ഇതിൽ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ വരുന്നത് കാർബൺ ഡൈ ഓക്സൈഡ്, ക്വാണ്ടിറ്റി വൈസ് ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ വരുന്നത് കാർബൺ ഡൈ ഓക്സൈഡ്, മീഥെയിൻ ആണ് ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ വരുന്നത്. Carbon dioxide എവിടെ നിന്ന് വരുന്നത്? Carbon dioxide basically comes from the fossil fuels that are burned. And methane primarily വരുന്നത് agricultural activities and livestock activities എന്നാണ് വരുന്നത്. Nitrous oxide is more of man-made. CFC is also more of man-made. Nitrous oxide also comes from the soil. Bacteria, when it acts on soil, it releases nitrous oxide. അങ്ങനെയും വരാറുണ്ട്. But otherwise, CFC and hydrofluorocarbons are mostly man-made. ഇപ്പം നമ്മുടെ റെഫ്രിജറേഷൻ അങ്ങനത്തെ സംഭവങ്ങൾ ഇടയ്ക്ക് ഉണ്ടാകുന്നുണ്ട്. That actually impacts the ozone layer also, apart from having its greenhouse effect. Now, see, when you have a normal emission of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but non-human activities basically normally വരുന്ന carbon dioxide ആണെങ്കിൽ എർത്തിന് നാച്ചുറൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ള സിങ്ക്സ് ഉണ്ട്. And these sinks are like the forest and the oceans are the main sinks we have. And what happens is that the carbon dioxide is absorbed by the forest and it is getting converted into oxygen and released to the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide is managed. The oceans also absorb a lot of carbon dioxide. Now, because of these sinks, the balance of carbon dioxide is maintained. Now, what happens by human activity? Human activity releases much more carbon dioxide, much more methane, much more nitrous oxide in the atmosphere than any of these sinks can actually absorb and manage. That is where the balance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, balance of methane in the atmosphere goes for a toss. Now, pre-industrial levels, if we compare the carbon dioxide that was there in the atmosphere and what is there in the atmosphere today, we can see a 45% increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is huge. And so there's no reason to look beyond. It's very clear that the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has caused a rise in the temperature. So we understood what is greenhouse effect, and we have understood what are the greenhouse gases. So now let's take a look at global warming. Global warming is an outcome of the greenhouse gases. But what happens when the carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide and CFC and HCFCs go on increasing in the atmosphere? The greenhouse effect of these gases or the atmosphere, because of larger presence of these greenhouse gases, keeps on increasing. They were radiating more and more heat back to Earth. And when more and more heat is radiated back to Earth, the average surface temperature of the Earth keeps on increasing. So this is the global warming effect that we are talking about. Coming to climate change. Climate is more of a long-term pattern of weather of a particular region. But because of a global warming, the temperature or the average temperature on the surface of the Earth kept on rising. And this has had an impact on the climate across regions. Why could this be? There are definitely a lot of reasons. But just to give you an understanding of how this happens. See, the climate of on our planet is actually a very complex system. For instance, you have the polar regions which are very cold. You have the equatorial regions which are comparatively hotter. Now, the Earth has a natural way of managing a balance of this temperature. For instance, the ocean currents, the air currents, these are flowing across these regions, the polar regions, the equatorial regions, and other regions continuously. Now, where you have a higher temperature, the water currents and the air currents carry this heat to places where it is having a low temperature. For instance, the polar regions dissipates the heat, gets cool, and it comes back to the equatorial region. So there is a dissipation of heat that is happening across the planet. Now, what happens when the temperature keeps on rising? The ice starts melting, and the ability of these currents, the ocean currents and the air currents, to dissipate heat actually goes down. One example where I think it will give us an understanding of how global warming can lead to climate change. But what happens in climate change? You have extreme climate situations like extreme heat waves. Higher precipitation happens, because of which the rainfalls become much more heavier than usual. You have probably shorter rainfalls, but the rainfalls are pretty heavy, which lead to flash floods and a lot of destruction. You have the sea levels rising, because obviously because of the glaciers and ice melting at the poles, the water that is discharged to the oceans keeps on increasing, and the sea level also keeps on rising. We have extreme drought situations, which has been reported of late from a lot of parts across the world. We have wildfires. The Australian wildfire, I think, is the recent one which caught the notice of everyone. Another impact would be the acidification of oceans. Like I mentioned before, oceans are a big sink for absorbing carbon dioxide, apart from the forests, obviously. Now, what happens when the oceans keep on absorbing carbon dioxide beyond a level? The acidic nature of the oceans, the water in the oceans, keeps on increasing. And when the acidic nature of this water keeps on increasing, it is harmful to the marine life, the corals, and you're hearing a lot of coral damage which is happening of late because of ocean acidification. This is because of the higher levels of carbon dioxide which is getting into the oceans. So, all these factors create a change in the climate as we know it. What is the impact of climate change on human beings? For that matter, for any living being. There is a small mammal by name pike, which was found in abundant across North America. It's a squirrel-like animal, and this could probably be one of the first mammals that can go extinct because of the climate change that has happened. The species called pike has had to move from areas which was getting hotter, and it has started moving up the mountains where it is cooler. Now, what will happen? After some time, the space that is available for these people where it can actually survive, for this species where it can actually survive, becomes lesser and lesser as it goes up the mountains. You don't have as much space as you had on the plains on top of the mountains. ഈ സെയിം സംഭവം തന്നെ ആൾക്കാർക്കുണ്ടാവും. For instance, we have mentioned about the rising sea levels. It is predicted by scientists that in the next 40 to 50 years, some of the major cities around the world, which are close to the seas, will vanish. Human migration, Manushanda Palayanam, because of climate change, is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we are having to handle in the next coming years. We discussed about greenhouse. We discussed about greenhouse effect. We understood what are greenhouse gases and its impact on the temperature. And we also understood what is global warming and climate change. That's all from us in this video. Please look forward to the next video, continuing on Paris Agreement. Signing off, Biju here from Uli Green, where Uli Green is all about making this world a greener place. Thank you.